Story time about how I found out my husband was seeing escorts while I was pregnant. Disclaimers that my story time was sent me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 6 years. We had tried and tried for a baby, and we had a really hard time. The first 3 years of our marriage was hell. We tried so much to get pregnant, but we just couldn't do it. We went to the doctor, and that's when they told us that my husband had a little problem. So basically, he was the reason why we weren't able to get pregnant easily. Because of this, I had to undergo a lot of treatments. I started taking all this different medication, which really messed with my hormones. For the first time in my life, I got acne, I started to gain weight, and I also started getting mood swings. Unfortunately, my husband for some reason thought this was a character flaw of mine, and that basically I should just be able to control my emotions. I took him to the doctor so that the doctor could explain to him what was happening to my body. Finally, the doctor told him that everything that was happening to me was because of the medicine that I was taking for us to have kids. My husband decided to apologize to me and wanted to take me on a trip. He took me to Hawaii for 2 weeks, and it was beautiful. We ended up making up, and it was the best time ever. A month later, we found out that I was pregnant. My husband was the happiest I'd ever seen him. 2 weeks later, I started noticing weird things in our bank account. I started sending $5,000 to one person in particular every single month. Story time about how I found out my husband was seeing escorts while I was pregnant. Disclaimers not my story time was sent me on Instagram. That's when I noticed that every single month he would send somebody $5,000. It had been happening for 3 months. Right away, I was suspicious. A few months back, he and I had watched a documentary about escorts. And during the documentary, he kept judging all the women and the men. You know, acting greater than thou. And as soon as I saw the payments on our bank account, it's like a light bulb went off in my head. He must have seen that documentary and been like, wow, I know I can do that. Of course he can. My husband is a 40-year-old, good-looking, wealthy man. So that's when I started investigating. I had full access to his laptop, which had all of his text messages, as well as emails, and he never bothered to change his password on any of it. I waited for him to leave to the gym, and that's when I got on his laptop. I uncovered a whole ring of escorts. Not only was he sending money to one girl through our bank account, he was paying other girls through Bitcoin. As I was crying in front of the laptop, I had the presence of mind to start adding up all the money he had spent. In only 3 months, my husband managed to spend $55,000, and from what I could gather, he had about 5 escorts. Keep in mind, he's doing all of this while I'm pregnant. So here's what I did. I managed to contact each girl and ask for the money back. And I basically threatened to expose them. One was a teacher, the other was a model, which I could contact her agency and accuse her. One was actually a stay-at-home mom who was married. Only one responded to my messages. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I found out my husband was seeing escorts while I was pregnant. Disclaimers that not my story time was sent me on Instagram. Finally, one of the escorts got back to me, and she told me that she would give me all of the money back. My husband had given this girl $7,000 in the time span of 2 weeks. Then she spilled all the tea. She told me my husband had signed up to an escort website, and that he had anywhere between 10 and 15 girls. So there were other ways he was paying them, and I just didn't know about it. This is when I came to my senses. I told her she did not need to send the money back to him because it wasn't her fault. It was my husband's fault. Then this girl told me that my husband would talk bad about me to her, and that they would meet up at fancy hotels, and that's when he would tell her that I was a toxic wife, and that all I cared about was money. By the way, I make my own money. I told her I was pregnant, and she was mortified. I gathered up all the evidence, and I confronted my husband. That's when he said, finally, I don't have to hide it anymore. He told me that he didn't really think I would care. Since when? I asked him to tell me the truth and tell me how many girls he was seeing and how much money he had spent. And he confessed that he had seen over 20 girls and probably spent over $100,000. Then he asked me for a divorce. I'm kind of glad he did because I was going to divorce him anyway. I am going to get his money and raise our child on our own. His family is trying to convince me otherwise though. What should I do? Is it wrong that my boyfriend wants me to watch rape porn? Huge trigger warning here. Please do not watch if you are sensitive to this. Take care of yourselves. I love you. My boyfriend and I have been together for 8 months. I just turned 21 and he's 33. He's always kind of been the perfect boyfriend, but a few months ago he started acting more like my dad. Started with him just telling me what to do, and then eventually he started trying to give me advice about everything I did. For example, he'd tell me how I needed to talk to my landlord and small things like that. And now I feel like it's gotten to the point where he wants to completely control me. Now here's the thing. I'm young and I don't know if I'm just overreacting or if I'm reading too much into this, but I know that sometimes he makes me feel really uncomfortable. Only 2 months after dating, he asked me to marry him, and I didn't say yes right away, and this really upset him. He accused me of wanting to stay single so that I could date other guys. I told him that I thought I was too young to get married and that we needed to get to know each other before we talked about marriage. But here's the thing. He started getting so upset that eventually I said yes. So as of now, we're kind of engaged, but I don't really want to. He wants us to go buy a ring, and he wants to formally ask my parents. I called my parents to tell him about it, and they were totally against the idea. I agree with my parents. I haven't told my boyfriend, but things get worse. Started showing me the porn he watches. When I didn't want to watch it, he got really mad at me. Part 2 is up. Is it wrong that my boyfriend wants me to watch rape porn when he wants to do sexy time? Huge trigger warning. Please don't watch this if you are sensitive. Take care of yourselves. I love you. I was laying on the bed and he flipped his laptop over. That's when he says, here, watch this. It was kind of like regular porn. Nothing too disturbing, but it made me feel really uncomfortable. Told him it looked funny and he said, why would it look funny? You don't like it? That's when I said, not really. At that point in my life, I had never looked up anything related to porn. It's not something that I was interested in. So I felt really uncomfortable. He turned the computer on and I couldn't see the screen anymore. For the next 3 hours, he stayed on his laptop in his room watching porn. I felt like I was interrupting him. I went to the kitchen and decided to cook. Dinner was ready. I asked him to come eat and he left me waiting another hour. When he finally comes out, his face was completely changed. And for the rest of the night, he was really quiet and kind of rude. A few days later, he brought up the engagement again. He asked me if I had time to go look at rings and reluctantly, I said yeah. He went into a jewelry store and he told me to just choose one. I told him that I didn't want to rush it and he said, it's fine, just choose it now. Later on that night, I asked him to drop me off at my place, but he said he wanted me to stay over at his. When we get to his apartment, he gets on his laptop again. That's when he shows me what he was watching. It was rape porn. He tried to kiss me and I felt sick to my stomach. Part 3 is it wrong that my boyfriend wants to watch rape porn when he wants to do sexy time? Huge trigger warning here. Please do not watch this if you are sensitive. Take care of yourselves. I love you. That's when he showed me the rape porn on his laptop. And he just lunged at me and tried to kiss me. I felt sick to my stomach. He asked me to sit on the bed, but I said no. That's when he said why. I told him I wasn't comfortable with what he was watching and that I really didn't like it at all. Then he just rolled his eyes and got mad at me. For the next 5 minutes, he called me a prude and told me that what he was doing was completely normal. And I guess part of me really did want to believe him and he managed to convince me. I asked him to close the laptop because I could hear the noise. He said I was overreacting and told me to go home. So I did. Didn't speak to him for 3 days until finally he came over to my place. He acted like nothing had happened. Now here's the thing. I don't know if it's a normal thing or not, but I don't think it is. I haven't Googled it or anything because I don't want to, but I also haven't talked about it to anybody. What scares me is that he's gonna want to do stuff like that and I'm not comfortable with it. It also concerns me that he has fantasies about that. That's something I would never ever want him to do. I made us dinner in my apartment and I decided to bring up the topic. That's when he said, can you just get over it? It's done. But I kept pushing and asked him some questions. I asked him how long he'd been watching that and if it made him, you know what. He said he'd only been watching it for a few days and that he already stopped and that he wouldn't do it again. Then he said, you have to stop being a prude. I want to be with somebody who's willing to try new stuff. Otherwise, I'd probably end up cheating. This actually really scared me, so I told him that I would try anything as long as I was comfortable with it. I don't want him to leave me because I do love him, but what he was watching on his laptop really made me nervous. I don't think I have the courage to break up with him or anything, and I do want to be with him. I just want to find a way to help him with this and not make it a big deal. I haven't told anybody in my family or my friends. Maybe I should just to see what their reaction is. What should I do? Bye. My fiance faked being rich just to get me to marry him. Should I leave him? My fiance has lied to me literally over hundreds of times. It all started when he and I met 3 years ago. I was turning 32 and going through a divorce, so I had no intention of ever getting into another relationship. At least not for a long time. Come from a really wealthy family, so I inherited a lot of money when I turned 18. That never stopped me from getting a job. I started working in fashion and it was amazing. Eventually I became a stylist and had my own business. My relationship with my then husband was not going well, so we decided to get a divorce. But my ex-husband and I never really had hard feelings and we stayed friends. At the time I was living in New York and had tons of friends. Every single weekend I was going out. And since I was single, I literally had nobody to answer to. My friends and I would go to exclusive clubs and restaurants every single night. This is how I met my compulsive liar of a fiance. He was friends with somebody in my friend group. Now everyone in my group was pretty wealthy. We all drove expensive cars, owned our own businesses, and we worked really hard. One of my friends introduced me to him, and within the first 5 minutes of our conversation, he told me that he was a Calvin Klein model. Of course I believed it because he was really attractive. And he basically asked me how much money I made a year. And I was honest with him. I earned around 300 grand a year. That's when he told me that he was a millionaire. Follow for part 2. My fiance faked being rich just so that I could marry him. Should I leave him? The very first night I met him, he told me that he was a millionaire and that he was a Calvin Klein model. Of course, I believed him because he was just that attractive. Then he asked me how much I earned per year, and I told him the truth, $300,000. Look on his face was of utter shock. He told me he almost couldn't believe that I would make that much money. And he started talking about how he's a millionaire and he models and he travels around the world. I was actually impressed. Later that night, I asked the friend that introduced me to him if it was all true. She said, yeah, he posts about it on his Instagram, so I think so. Went to the bathroom and started looking him up on Instagram. And it looked like it was true. He did model for Calvin Klein and was modeling around the world. But honestly, from his Instagram, I really couldn't gather if he was a millionaire or not. It's not like he was posting pictures of him in a Maybach or anything. That very same night, he asked me if he could come to my apartment and I said no. The very next day, he asked me out on a date and I said yes. Ended up going to a really fancy restaurant and he paid for the bill. When the bill came, it was over $1,000. Ordered so many things off the menu. What I really didn't like was that he barely touched any of the food. The rest of the week, he invited me to all these different different restaurants. On our second week, I asked him if he wanted to come to my place to have dinner, which he did. And the look of his face when he showed up to my apartment was like shocked. Finally, he asked me how much my rent was. That's when I told him I didn't pay rent. I owned the apartment. That's when he said, yeah, I own my own place too. And then I asked him, why haven't you invited me to your apartment? He said that he was getting renovations done. Exactly a month into us dating, he asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. Oh, I had not been to his apartment at this point. He had been paying for everything. Follow for part 3. Fiance fake being rich to get me to marry him. Should I leave him? At this point, he had been paying for everything. Every single time we went to dinner, any date we ever went on, he paid for everything. About 2 months into our relationship, I asked him again if I could go to his apartment. That's when he made up another excuse. Told me the contractor that was doing all the renovations in his apartment basically bailed on him. So his apartment was basically in shambles. I told him that I actually knew a contractor who could help him out. And he told me not to worry about it, that he had it covered. The very next week, he had prepared an elaborate proposal. He took me to Central Park where he had a band. He gave me a 3-carat pink diamond ring. Of course, I said yes. I was so happy. Never thought I'd find love again. After the engagement, I told him that we should just move in together. That's when he said, perfect. I can move into your place next week. I was like, what? He said that he actually wanted to sell his apartment. So I said yes. And the very next week, he moved into my place. When he showed up to my apartment, he literally only had 2 suitcases. And most of the clothes were kind of old and raggedy. I asked him where all of his stuff was, and he said, this is it. That's when I started getting really suspicious. I called his modeling agency, and they told me that they hadn't worked with him in 3 years. So apparently, he wasn't really a model. Confronted him and asked him what was going on. He confessed that he hadn't modeled in years, that when he met me, he was so impressed that he needed to tell me something to impress me. He told me he had a lot of credit card debt and that he actually couldn't afford the lifestyle he was showing me. Then he also told me that he never even had an apartment. He was sleeping on his friend's couch. I told him I couldn't marry him or trust him, and that he was probably only after my money. He swears that he loves me. No, he hasn't asked me for money and he's offering to actually pay for rent. My friends and family think I should leave him, but I love him and I'm so attracted to him. What should I do? Story time of how I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me with my cousin. My boyfriend and I had been together for 2.5 years. His family loved me and my family loved him and they expected us to get married. Well, last year when COVID started, we were actually in different countries, so we didn't see each other for 3 months. During those 3 months, we FaceTimed 4 times a day, and we were always texting. He happened to be quarantining in our hometown, so both of our families were in the same place. I was quarantined in a different country. One day, my cousin calls me and tells me that she met a really nice guy on a dating website. I was so happy for her because she had had bad luck with guys. Every single week, her and I would catch up on the phone and she would tell me how much she liked this guy, and how amazing their dates were, and how amazing he was in bed, how sweet and considerate he was. I couldn't be happier for her. Well, when I finally get back home, my boyfriend is super distant and cold. So naturally, I called my cousin and complained. She told me to give him space. She said I should just leave him alone. And so like an idiot, I did leave him alone. One day, my cousin calls me and tells me to come over for dinner. When I got there, my boyfriend's car was parked in her garage. I thought it was just her nice way of trying to get us to talk. I walk in and catch them doing the dirty on the couch. Come back for part 2. So I walk in on my cousin and my boyfriend doing the dirty on her couch. They quickly get up from the couch and get dressed. Of course, by that time, I'm in hysterics. I'm crying and yelling. My boyfriend instantly got on his knees and begged me for forgiveness. I went up to my cousin and I punched her right in the face. She wasn't expecting that. And I said, well, this is the guy that you've been dating, isn't it? She said yes, and that she was just trying to find the best way to tell me. And so she just thought the best way to tell me was to get me to walk in on her and him doing the dirty. I punched her again. My boyfriend came to her rescue, though. Instantly went into hero mode, which made me even angrier, so I punched him too. I stormed out of her house and went back to my house. Well, I told my parents everything. And my dad went over to my uncle's house, my cousin's dad, and he told him everything. She was about to turn 19, so he took away her phone and her car. And I get a phone call from my ex, come back for part 3. Part 3. So my lying, cheating ex calls me and explains to me why he actually slept with my cousin. He said that he was so lonely and that he didn't know what to do, and that the closest thing to me he could find was my cousin. Right, as if that was any comfort to me. He said I should be grateful that I didn't cheat with someone else. I told him he had totally betrayed my trust and that I could never ever trust him again. And then he confessed that she was pregnant, and that his parents wanted them to get married. He said he just wanted to give me a heads up. Then he said that we could still be together, but just not tell anyone, so basically he wanted me to be his side piece. I couldn't believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. It was like I didn't know this man. Guess what I did? I recorded the entire conversation. So I went straight to my cousin and I let her listen to it. She was so shocked. She couldn't believe that he would offer to have me as a side chick. Well, I also let my uncle listen to it. He went to my ex's house and beat him up. Honestly, that made me sad, but he deserved it. They now have a baby and he's gained 50 pounds. Trust your instincts, girl, and always record your conversations. Also, how cute are my nails? I caught my neighbor trying to open my apartment door. Should I be worried? Disclaimer is not my story time. Instead of me on Instagram. I just moved into my new apartment 2 months ago. Everything's been completely normal and fine up until a few weeks ago. I went to my mailroom to pick up some packages and there happened to be one of my neighbors there. He says his name is Jerry and he actually introduced himself to me. I had never seen him before, but he just said, "Hey, how are you?" I said, "Hi." And then he said, "Are you new to the building?" And I confirmed that I was new to the building. That's when he said that I looked familiar to him and he asked me where I went to school. I told him where I went to school, and then he started asking me more questions. But the more questions he asked me, the more I realized he was just trying to find me on Facebook. I didn't give him my last name or anything. But ultimately, this guy knows where I live, so I was just like, whatever. That's when he started recommending restaurants and cafes around our neighborhood. He just kept talking and talking and talking. I ended up standing there for 10 minutes listening to him talk until I told him I had to leave. That's when he said it was so nice to meet me and that he'd see me around. Keep in mind, he does not know what floor I live on at this point. Then a few days later, I see him again at the mailroom. I said hello, but I made sure to act like I was in a hurry. But of course, he had to stop me and we talked again for like 5 minutes. Follow for part 2. I caught my neighbor trying to open my apartment door. Should I be worried? Disclaimers are not my story time. I sent him on Instagram. I knew he was going to talk my ear off, so I told him I was in a hurry and I had to go. And he says, "No worries, maybe we should catch up sometime." And I said, "Cool, bye." I did not say yes. A few hours later, I get on my Instagram and I see that he started following me. I wasn't super creeped out at this point. I was just like, okay, maybe he's just trying to be friendly. I instantly went and blocked him from seeing my stories. I didn't want him to keep tabs on me that way. Oh, also, I forgot to mention I work from home. And I do have 2 dogs. My dogs are always pretty quiet. I've never had a complaint about them. They really don't bark. Since I work from home, I walk them about 3 times a day. And remember, at this point, he doesn't know what floor I live on. At least I didn't think so. A few days later, I decided to go have dinner with one of my best friends. I left my apartment for literally 40 minutes because I try not to leave my dogs alone for too long. When I get off the elevator at my floor, I see the guy trying to open my door. He was pushing the door with his shoulder. I yelled at him from across the hallway and said, "What are you doing?" Then he looked shocked. Then he said, "Oh, sorry. I heard noise in your apartment and I wanted to make sure your dogs are okay." How does he know I have dogs? Part 3 is up. I caught my neighbor trying to open my apartment door. Should I be worried? Disclaimers not my story time. Instead on my Instagram. When I caught him red-handed trying to open my door, I asked him what he was doing. He said that he walked by and heard my dogs making really loud noises, and that he just wanted to make sure that they were okay. My dogs were making 0 noises, and how did he know I had 2 dogs? And how did he know what floor I lived on? I was officially creeped out. He saw the look on my face and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I was just trying to check on your dogs." That's when I told him that he didn't need to do that and that it was okay and he could leave now. That's when he started freaking out. He said, "I'm so sorry, please forgive me. I can tell I made you uncomfortable and I feel like I've ruined everything." That's when I told him that he hadn't ruined anything because nothing was going on. Then he said, "Maybe you should give me your phone number so that if something like this happens again, I can just call you." I said no immediately. I told him he could leave again, and he walked away. He's halfway down the hallway and says, "Oh, we should still catch up for some coffee or something." What? I am concerned, but I don't know if I'm just freaking out for no reason. Could he have really been trying to help? Or am I right to think that he was trying to break in? I emailed my landlord and they said that they've never had a problem with him before. What the heck should I do? I secretly hate my husband, but I can't leave him. Disclaimers not my story time. Listen to me on Instagram. My husband and I have only been married for 2 months. We dated on and off for almost 7 years. So when he finally proposed, I was actually really happy. The problem is that we never lived together before we got married. He never wanted to move in with me when we were dating. He also had this thing where he wouldn't want me to come to his apartment randomly. He would always schedule times where I could hang out with him at his apartment. This all seems suspicious, but I really wanted to marry him, so I just decided to overlook those things. But now that we're married, I see why he didn't want me to come over and why he had all these strange rules. It turns out that he's incredibly messy, lazy, and is super picky about the food he eats. So now that I'm his wife, I'm constantly having to clean up after him. Every single time he goes to the toilet, he always leaves skid marks, or for some reason, he always has like explosive poop and it goes everywhere on the bowl. So every single time I go to the bathroom after he does, I'm always having to clean it up. And it makes me so angry that I have to clean up after him that I have begun to hate him. Also, he's super picky about his food. We can never go to restaurants because he never wants anything on the menu. And if we ever do go to a restaurant, we have to go wherever he wants. I love all types of cuisine, especially Indian, Mediterranean, Japanese, but he thinks it's gross. He comes from a very American family. He grew up eating chicken nuggets and grilled cheeses. To him, anything with some spice is way too much. That means I can't cook what I want because he always complains about the smell. Thankfully, he's got an office that's 30 minutes away. So when he leaves, that's when I cook. But I have to make sure to air out the apartment before he gets home. I'm always doing his laundry and cleaning up after him. Every single time he shaves, he leaves hair everywhere. I actually hate this man now. I told him that I don't want to live with him anymore, but he freaked out. He's begging for me to stay, but I'm so unhappy. What should I do? My boyfriend and his friends trapped me in a house and assaulted me. Disclaimers is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. I met my boyfriend in college last year. We had the same class, and during class I would always catch him staring at me. At first it was a little creepy, but once we started talking I realized how charming he was. One day he came up to me and just started asking me about where I was from, and right away I got these butterflies in my stomach. He was really attractive, and I could tell that the girls in our class all looked at him a certain way too. He asked me out on a date and I said yes. But when some of my friends found out that I was going on a date with him, they started telling me things. One of my friends told me that there was a rumor going around that he had assaulted another girl. I just couldn't picture him being that way. He didn't seem capable of anything like that. Later on that day, I got a message from another girl telling me the same thing. And when I asked for information about the girl he supposedly assaulted, they told me that they didn't remember her name. That apparently she just left school after it happened. Part 2 is up. My boyfriend and his friends trapped me in a house and assaulted me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. After I heard about the rumors that he had assaulted a girl, I asked for evidence and nobody had any. Nobody even remembered the name of the girl. So I decided to go on the date with him. He took me on a picnic and at first it was really nice. He had asked me what some of my favorite foods were and he brought them all with him. He brought hummus and cherry tomatoes and chips. But 5 minutes into the picnic, he grabs me and kisses me. Now, I'm not saying that I didn't want to be kissed, I just didn't want it to happen so quickly. And he didn't even ask me for permission, which looking back now was the first red flag. After that, he couldn't keep his hands off of me. I never said no, so he just kept going. He kept touching my shoulder and my legs, and he would lean in and kiss me every now and then. By the end of the day, I was into it. The rest of the relationship, he was always a little bit aggressive. He never asked me if I wanted to do anything, he would just do it. A week after we started dating, he introduced me to his friends. One of them jokingly asked my boyfriend when it was his turn to take with me. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend and his friends trapped me in a house and assaulted me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, I was sending me on Instagram. That's when one of his friends asked him when it was his turn to take with me. And although he was joking, it was disgusting. My boyfriend laughed though. He thought it was so funny. Mind you, this is the first time I'm ever meeting his group of friends. After that, there were a few incidents. On one occasion at a party, one of his friends forced me to dance with him for 3 minutes. Although while he kept grabbing my waist and my butt. Finally, my boyfriend came back and I told him and he just laughed. Another time we were at the beach and one of his friends came up behind me and undid my bikini top. Essentially, I flashed everyone. Stuff like that kept happening until the night of the incident. We're all walking back from a club when we stopped at a house. It looked abandoned and my boyfriend insisted that we all go in. I said no, but he finally convinced me. And as soon as we get into the house, my boyfriend tells me that I need to run. He looked so serious that I actually ran up the stairs. Then I could feel all of them chasing me. One of them grabbed my shirt and ripped it. And I got into one of the rooms, I tried to close the door, but they opened it. And another one grabbed my hair and pushed me up against a wall. He started trying to kiss me, but I bit him. I ran into another room and one of them was already there. He tripped me and when I fell to the ground, he grabbed my neck. Then he started saying that I've been teasing them this whole time. Finished tearing my shirt and took it off. I was screaming at the top of my lungs at this point. Another one of the guys came in and I was able to get up and run. They chased me around the house for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only 30 seconds. And that's when I realized that the only person I hadn't seen was my boyfriend. And I remembered the rumors about my boyfriend having assaulted a girl. I realized that it was true, and that I was just his next victim. Only this time his friends were involved. Part 4 is up. My boyfriend and his friends trapped me in a house and assaulted me. As I'm hiding in a corner hoping that none of them find me, I hear footsteps walking towards me. I realize that this is probably where they had brought the other girl to assault her, and that they knew every corner of this house, so there was no way for me to hide. Suddenly, I feel someone grab my elbow and pull me up. It was the friend that had torn my shirt and told me that I was teasing them. Immediately, he pins my arms behind me and starts trying to kiss me. Then he actually said that I should be flattered because they all find me so beautiful, and that the more I fight back, the funner it is for them. Suddenly, I hear my boyfriend yell stop, runs up the stairs and into the room. At this point, the other 3 guys were in the room, just watching the other one kiss me. Then he said the joke is over. He grabs me and takes me out of the house. That's when I turned to him and say that the rumors were true this whole time. Then he grabbed me by the shoulders, looked me in the face and said that she had wanted it, and that his friends and him were just joking around in the house. Dropped me off at my dorm and the next morning I woke up with bruises and hickeys all over my body. I reported it to the school, but they've done nothing. My boyfriend keeps swearing that it's a joke. I blocked him, but he keeps showing up at my door. He's being sweet and even sending me groceries. I'll keep you guys updated. Story time about how I was voted the ugliest girl in high school. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, I sent me on Instagram. Growing up, I was really awkward. My parents always used to call me the ugly duckling, but my dad told me not to worry, that when I would grow up, I would become beautiful. Honestly, this really stuck to my head, and I am very beautiful now. I used to have braces, acne. My hair has always been curly, but I didn't know how to treat it back then. My mom had really straight hair, so she had no idea how to do my hair either. And this was the toughest thing for me. I would show up to school with knots in my hair because I didn't even know how to brush it. Eventually, my mom did start taking better care of my hair, which really helped. I also didn't know how to dress for my body. I wore big hoodies, big t-shirts, while the other girls in my high school dressed for their body type. I honestly just had no clue. I did get bullied, but mostly by boys. I think the girls probably just felt bad for me, so I never really had problems with other girls. A group of boys would always bother me. One of them even asked me out, pretending that he wanted to go out with me. Of course I said yes because I actually believed him. He asked me to go to the movies, and when I showed up, he wasn't there. I decided to go watch the movie anyway, but the next day in school, I couldn't hear the end of it. To my face, this guy called me stupid. A few days later, they made a list of the ugliest girls. Part 2 is up. Story time about how I was voted the ugliest girl in high school. Disclaimer, is not my story time, I sent me on Instagram. That's when the boys came out with the list of the ugliest girls in high school. What they did was pass around some flyers with all the names on it, and then they had people write the number 1 ugliest girl on the list. As soon as I saw my name on the list, I wanted to die. I pretended I was sick and went home. There was this one girl who actually stood up for me and the rest of the girls, and she was actually one of the prettiest girls in the entire school. She told everyone to knock it off, but nobody listened to her. Instead, the boys added her to the list as well, but there was no way that she was going to get voted number 1. I would show up every day to school that week wishing that I was dead. Finally, on Friday, they came out with the winner. And of course, everyone picked me. I was completely mortified, but I actually started laughing when I saw the list. It was like the stress from the entire week had finally accumulated, and my reaction was to just laugh. While they were all hoping that I was just going to break down and cry, I started to laugh in their faces. The teacher asked me what was wrong and I showed her the list. She ran over to the principal's office and everything became way too dramatic for me. So I literally decided to run away from school. When I got home, I told my parents everything. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I was voted the ugliest girl in high school. Disclaimers, now my story time was sent to me on Instagram. When I got home and told my parents what happened, my dad actually started to cry. He actually did feel really bad for me. They sat me down and told me that looks weren't everything. That's when my dad told me again that I would grow out of this awkward phase. Then they decided to take me shopping to the mall. I went into this really cute clothing store that I had always wanted to go to but never had the courage to, and they actually bought me a full wardrobe. After that, that's when my mom took me to a salon and they actually did my hair. They gave me a whole hair care routine, which I had never even heard of before, and I even went and got some Noxzema, which actually the Noxzema really worked for my acne. So when I got back to school, I felt like a different person, but not really because I was still me. The principal had gone out of her way to make all the boys pay, but really they only got suspension and didn't go to school for a week. The rest of high school was actually not that bad. I did look a lot better. 5 years later, I'm absolutely gorgeous. And guess what? One of the boys who bullied me actually slipped into my DMs last week. What should I say? Story time about how my boyfriend's ex is threatening to have me raped. This girl is so crazy, I'm actually scared of her. My boyfriend and I started dating 3 months ago. Everything started when we made it official on Instagram. But here's the thing. My boyfriend never told me that he had a crazy ass ex. He just told me that she was intense. But as soon as he posted about me on his Instagram, she followed me on 3 separate accounts and started stalking my Instagram. That very same day, I started getting these weird, ominous text messages. For 2 weeks straight, this girl pretended to be another guy. And this guy was basically saying that he knew where I lived, and that he knew what car I drove, where I worked, and that he wanted to see me in person so that he could profess his love to me. After about a week of getting those messages, I showed him to my boyfriend. And that's when this man tells me that he needs to confess something. That his ex-girlfriend before me is crazy and that she has been stalking him for 6 months. And that the person behind those messages was probably her. He told me to ignore the messages and that she would eventually stop. But then I started getting messages from another account, and these messages were way more aggressive. They sent me a picture of me walking my dog in the park, and that they wanted to kidnap me. Of course, I went to the police. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend's crazy ex is threatening to have me raped. That's when I saw the email that was filled with disturbing images of women being essayed. And at the bottom it said that it would happen to me. Of course I showed my boyfriend the email. Then he told me to put on my shoes because we were going to go to his ex's house. I was terrified. We get to his ex's house and knock on her door. She opens the door and instantly hugs us. Then she proceeds to act like a friend. He showed her the emails and all the messages and she flat out denied it. And get this. Then she says that someone is trying to set her up and that she's not crazy enough to do something like that. We finally left her house and for a few days I didn't get any messages until the messages started up, and even worse this time. It was from that same account before. The messages said that they would kidnap me and do stuff to me in their car, and that I would never know who it was because they'd be wearing a mask. For the next 5 days, the messages continued. It got to the point where I wasn't even leaving my house. My boyfriend and family had to accompany me everywhere. My boyfriend and family are both scared. I want to expose her so badly, but what if she does something to me? What if she hired some strange guy to follow me and kidnap me and do stuff to me? Or what if she does something to me herself? I'm terrified. What should I do? Story time about how my boyfriend's crazy ex is threatening to have me raped. After 2 weeks of her pretending to be other people and sending me crazy messages, I finally went to the police. That's when the police told me that there was no way of actually knowing if she was the one that sent the messages, and that there was no actual crime committed because she hadn't hurt me physically. Okay. That's when I forced my boyfriend to tell me what had happened between them. So apparently my boyfriend and her had dated for 2 years on and off. She wanted to get married, and my boyfriend said yes eventually, but she took that as him saying yes, and she even started planning a wedding. When she started planning the wedding, my boyfriend told her that she was crazy. And yes, he used the word crazy. He broke up with her and abandoned her. So I see why she would be really upset. But why is she taking it out on me? That's when I told my boyfriend he needed to tell her to leave me alone. He called her right there in front of me, and she acted like she had done nothing. She completely denied that she was the one sending the messages. 20 minutes after they hung up, I got an email. And the email was filled with disturbing images of women being essayed. And at the bottom of the email it said, "This is gonna happen to you." I was terrified. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I got my sister's boyfriend to fall in love with me, and I do not regret it. Disclaimers in on my story time. Send me on Instagram. My sister and I have always been rivals since we were kids. I'm 22 and she's 24. We were always super close in age, which means we competed for everything, including our parents' attention, clothes and makeup, and somehow we always ended up liking the same boys. When I turned 16, she was going away for college, and I actually started to appreciate her a lot more. We started calling each other every single day, and I realized that I really miss my sister. We actually got closer living further away than together. My parents were also really happy with this because her and I would not get along when she lived at home. One weekend I decided to go stay with her on her campus, and that's when things got interesting. My sister was living it up. She was partying all the time. I told her that I didn't really like that she was partying so much. I told her that I didn't feel comfortable with her passing out at random guys' places. She told me that I was overreacting and not to tell my parents. But I got home and told my parents everything. This is when our relationship became bad once again. After this, my sister didn't trust me, and basically she became my enemy. She started criticizing everything about me, the clothes that I'd wear, so I had to distance myself from her. My parents wanted her to move back in with us because she wasn't doing well in school. She was clearly partying instead of studying. Of course, my sister refused to move back home, so my parents basically cut her off. I got a new boyfriend at this time, and my sister would flirt with him anytime she came home. I even caught them hugging one time. Part 2 is story time about how I stole my sister's boyfriend and don't regret it. Disclaimers in my story time. Send me on Instagram. When I walked in on my boyfriend and my sister hugging, I knew I had to do something. I went straight to my parents and told them what she was doing. My dad pulled her into her room and talked to her, but she totally denied everything. She said that she was not flirting with my boyfriend, but we all knew that was a lie. Even my boyfriend was honest with me and told me that she had been flirting with him openly. That's when my boyfriend told me he didn't even want to come over to our house because my sister made him that uncomfortable. And when I told my parents this, they felt so embarrassed. They called my boyfriend and personally apologized to him. He was actually so sweet though. He would come visit me to my house and we would just chill out in his car while my sister was inside watching us through the window. Yeah, she was crazy. He and I eventually broke up because he went off to live in another country. And guess what? My sister said that she knew he never loved me and that's why he left me. She was being so mean at the time. A few years later, she started dating someone. Of course, at the time, it never occurred to me to even flirt with him or act the way that she did with my boyfriend. You see, I'm above all that. But as soon as I got a new boyfriend, she would start flirting with him. And she had no shame about it. This became a running problem in my family. My parents would ask her to leave me alone and my boyfriends, and she would say that she did. But no, she didn't. Oh yeah, and her boyfriend broke up with her because he noticed that she would flirt with a lot of guys. Apparently, she did it even in front of him. So when she finally got a new boyfriend, I decided that I was gonna do the same thing to her. I started flirting with her boyfriend a little. Not a lot, but I definitely made sure to tell him I thought he was attractive. After a few weeks, he started saying things back to me, and I knew that it was working. I never did it in front of my sisters and my parents because I didn't want them to get mad at me. So instead, I got her boyfriend to basically fall in love with me. I already knew everything about him because my sister would tell me, so I just started telling him I liked the same things he did. It got to the point where one day he kissed me and I didn't tell my parents. I made sure to get his hopes up. Part 3 is up. Once I got my sister's boyfriend to fall in love with me, her life turned to misery. No, I didn't regret it. Disclaimers is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. One day I went up to my sister and told her that her boyfriend had kissed me. First she thought I was making it up to make her jealous. She told me I could never compete with her and that she was the more beautiful sister out of the two of us. Which is wrong. So I handed her my phone so that she could see all the messages that her boyfriend and I had been sending each other. And that's when she lost it. She started wailing on me. She started slapping and kicking me. My parents ran into her room and asked her what was wrong. I told my parents that I treated my sister the way she treated me. She would always go after my boyfriends, flirt with them, and try to get them to break up with me. Of course, my parents didn't agree with me, so they were really angry. They separated us, but my sister went crazy. She called her boyfriend and told him to come over. Obviously, he didn't know that she already knew at the time. And when he came over, she started beating him up. She grabbed a pan from the kitchen and started swinging at him. She actually ended up giving him a concussion. After that, she begged for his forgiveness, but he still broke up with her. At the end of the day, he ended up leaving her. She was so stupid for begging him to stay with her. Her boyfriend even asked me if we could be together, and I told him no. I told him that the whole time I had just been playing him just to get back at my sister, which I know is so cruel, but he deserved it. After that, my sister and I decided to make peace. She told me that she wouldn't mess with my boyfriends anymore and that she would stop being evil. But after a month of having my new boyfriend, I found her flirting with him too. I told her if she didn't stop that I would make her life miserable once again. I'm pretty sure she has a boyfriend, but she doesn't want to tell my family. Cause she knows that I'll go after him and I would probably end up making him fall in love with me too. But at this point, I just don't know what to do. What should I do? She's so evil and I want to make her life miserable. Bye. Here's a little story time of when I got to be in a movie with Robert De Niro in The Comedian. So in the movie, I play Harvey Keitel's girlfriend. If you don't know him, he's a really well-known actor. He's in his 80s. And as soon as he met me, he said I was way too young to play his girlfriend in the movie. So they basically downgraded my role and they took away several scenes that he and I had. One was a bedroom scene, a kissing scene. So I was brokenhearted for sure. The only day that I got to spend on set, one of the lead actresses came up to me and looked me up and down and said, "Aren't you cold in that?" And I said, "No, of course not, but thanks." And she looked me up and down again and turned around and walked away. I was wearing a two-piece set. that wardrobe chose for me, and it was really upsetting because she's the A-lister getting paid millions of dollars, and I'm just this random actress who's lucky enough to be there getting paid $120 for the role. I took myself out to New York for it and paid for the flight myself just for the opportunity. Like, not cool at all. Story time about how I flew 8 hours away to meet a famous guy who eventually ghosted me. I might give you a clue about who this person is in part 3. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. Back in 2020, when all our lives were falling apart, I was really bored. So I decided to get on Instagram and DM some of my celebrity crushes and celebrity influencers / YouTubers, Instagrammers, whatever you want to call them. I never ever expected to get a response. But in fact, I got a couple of responses. One of them being my biggest celebrity crushes. Fortunately, all he wanted was to, do the dirty. And he asked me out right away, but I wasn't comfortable, so I said no. Because I said no, he decided to ghost me too. But then a couple of weeks later, I got a response from one of the influencers. And right away, he asked me out too. He said he wanted to go out for lunch or dinner. But here's the thing, I live on the East Coast, he lives on the West Coast. When I told him this, he actually offered to buy me a ticket to fly out the very next day. I made up an excuse as to why I couldn't go. I told him that I had to work. And he told me that he would pay me to go over there so that I wouldn't lose out on my money. I thought about it for 2 days and I eventually said yes. Am I dumb? Absolutely. Part 2 is up. Story time about how I flew 8 hours to meet a famous guy who eventually ghosted me. I will give you a clue of who it is in part 3. Disclaimer is not my story time, was letting me on Instagram. And he offered to give me the money that I would have made at work and fly me out there. Thought about it and I said yes. By the way, I'm 24 years old. I didn't even tell my parents that I was gonna do this. Made up this whole story about how I won a giveaway and I was needing to fly out the very next day. But here's the thing. The influencer asked me if I could put the flight on my credit card. That once I arrived to LA, he would give me the cash in person. God, how could I be so stupid? I packed my bags and chose my best outfits. Even went to the salon and got my hair done and refreshed my eyelash extensions. So I spent like $400 that day to get ready to go. And I called my job and told them that I was sick and that I wouldn't be able to go to work for a week. And the very next morning I got on the flight, which happened to be delayed. So my whole travel time was about 9 hours. We did exchange numbers, so I texted him when I landed. He messages me back saying, awesome, let me know when you're in the Uber, which he had told me that he was gonna go pick me up. Gave me an address which I assumed was his house. But when I showed up, it was a party, like an influencer party, and he wasn't there. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I flew 8 hours to meet a famous guy who ended up ghosting me. I'm giving you guys a clue at the end. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. When I finally got to the address that he had sent me, I realized he wasn't there. It was an influencer party. Like influencers that I knew and I followed on Instagram. So I started going up to people and asking them if they had seen him. Finally, one person told me that they had seen him leave with another girl. Another girl. I was crushed. I went to the bathroom and cried for about 20 minutes. I composed myself and I called him and he didn't answer. I texted him and he didn't answer. Instead, I went to a fancy restaurant in Beverly Hills and I stayed at a nice hotel. I figured I might as well have a good time if I was there. Guess what though? He called me at 3 in the morning when I was asleep. Called him the next morning and he didn't answer. Here's your clue. He has a YouTube channel and used to have long hair. This man proceeded to ghost me for a full week. When I got back home, I sent him a message saying how disappointed I was. That's when he FaceTimes me and asked me to come back to LA. I asked him for the money for the ticket and he said he couldn't give it to me until he saw me in person. What should I do? My boyfriend's friends call me fat and ugly and my boyfriend doesn't defend me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, I sent me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 3 months. We're both in our early 20s and his friends are a tiny bit older. Some of these guys are already married, but they always try to convince my boyfriend to not get married. And here's how things started. A few weeks ago, we all had a pool party. They all brought their wives and girlfriends and all of these women have had plastic surgery. I'm talking BBLs, lip filler, everything. Me on the other hand, I'm completely natural. I'm on the skinny side, so I don't have a lot of fat in my body. That means I don't have a lot of curves. But my boyfriend has told me time and time again that he loves my body. We're both really attracted to each other, and I've never in my life been told that I'm ugly or fat. I'm not sure how it came up. During the pool party, the men started rating all the girls at the party. They were trying to do it behind our backs, but I happened to hear the conversation. No, my boyfriend didn't say anything. He kind of just stayed quiet. Guess who they started with first? Me. They said I was a hard 4, that I didn't have a womanly body, and that my face was too angular. And one of them straight up said she's kind of ugly. They all started to laugh, and they rated the rest of the girls there. Everyone else was pretty much a 9 and a 10. But the entire time, my boyfriend stayed quiet. It's obviously really upset me. Went to the bathroom and just cried for the rest of the night. My boyfriend came looking for me. Part 2. My boyfriend's friends call me fat and ugly and he doesn't defend me. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. I basically spent the entire night in the bathroom crying. My boyfriend came over and knocked on the door. He instantly started apologizing to me. He knew that I had heard the entire conversation and told me that he was sorry. I asked him why he didn't defend me and he said that he didn't want to go against his friends. That they were his only group of friends and that he didn't want to get on their bad side. I told him next time he needed to defend me. That if he didn't do it, then I would. And he said, please don't get into into a fight with them. They're really cool guys. I ended up leaving the party and I didn't say bye to anybody. A few weeks later, I had to hang out with them again. But this time they started talking about the way that I was dressed. One of them said that the dress I was wearing made me look really pudgy. And again, they would all laugh. And yeah, they said all of this in front of me. I looked at my boyfriend and said, "Are you not going to defend me?" And they all started laughing at my boyfriend. By the way, if I haven't mentioned this, they all went to the same sorority, so I think they still have that sorority mentality. One of the wives that was there thankfully stepped in and told them that they were all assholes and that they needed to leave me alone because I looked good. A few hours later, somebody was talking about kissing, and one of them asked my boyfriend what it was like to kiss me because I had 0 lips. I instantly stormed out of the party. My boyfriend followed me. Part 3 is my boyfriend's friends call me ugly and fat and he doesn't defend me. Disclaimers on my story time of sending me on Instagram. They told him it must have been awful kissing me because I had 0 lips. Instantly ran out of the house and went to my car. I was so humiliated and once again my boyfriend did not defend me. He followed me to my car and I asked him if he loved me or not. He said he did love me, that his friends and him just had a different way of talking about girls. I told him that hurting my feelings was not a different way of talking. A few hours after I got home, one of the wives started texting me. She told me that his friends spent the whole night bad-mouthing me, and that essentially they were trying to convince my boyfriend to break up with me. They kept telling him that he could do better than me, that I had no ass and no boobs, that I was simply just not pretty enough. Finally, my boyfriend did tell him that he thought I was beautiful and that he liked me. That's when they all told him that he needed to get glasses. Here's the best part. A few hours after they all started getting even drunker, he told me that one of the friends started saying that he would want to F me and that it looked like I was probably good in the sack. What? So they want me, but they don't want me? That's when she told me her theory. She said that they probably found me somewhat attractive and that they didn't want my boyfriend to be with me because they wanted me. I feel like that's a little bit far-fetched. It's kind of like the thing in school they tell you. If a boy bothers you, it means that he likes you. Maybe it's true. Either way, I told my boyfriend that I would never hang out with his friends again, but I am thinking of breaking up with him. Can't believe that he wouldn't defend me, not even a little bit. And when he did, I wasn't even present. Also, the way they talk about women is just disgusting. I do love him though. What should I do? Toxic best friend story time. My best friend's name was Jessica and she was from Pennsylvania and she was from a broken home, and when she met my mom, she absolutely loved my mom and we became fast friends really quick. She always wanted to come over to my house, and when I didn't want her to come over for some reason because I wanted to be with my family, she would get really upset. She became really possessive over me with my family and other people at school, so I basically couldn't have any other friends except for her. And when she would see me hang out with people, she would start making up rumors and accuse me of having talked bad about other people. Jessica was also really promiscuous, but I never judged her for it. I supported her in whatever she wanted to do, like hang out with older boys, like much older boys. And one day she came to me and said that she was pregnant and that she was planning on having an abortion. 2 months later, she came out and said the same. Part 2 of Toxic Best Friend. TikTok deleted this, don't know why. So my best friend comes to my house having had 2 abortions in 1 month at this point, and she was upset, she was crying, she felt sick, she had nausea. I gave her medication like ibuprofen or something. I didn't know what to do. I was a 13-year-old child. And then she told me that she was in love with me and that she didn't know what she would do if I didn't love her the same way back. At this point, my hands were shaking, my knees were shaking. I didn't know how to help her. The thought of her being sick at my house and her family not knowing was making me feel horrible. The fact that I hadn't told my mom at that point made me feel horrible. So I went and I told my mom. She called her family right away and they came to pick her up. They took her to the hospital right away. My mom and I were checking on her every single day during the time that she was in the hospital, calling, finding out how she was. The next week, okay, so people were judging me in the last video because I snitched, but I was 13, you guys. What would you do if you were 13 and your friend was sick in your house? Toxic best friend story time, part 3. So this week at school was horrible. I show up and there are so many things written on my locker. Nobody knew. The principal had it all cleaned up. The guys were boys were being really aggressive with me, writing me letters, threatening letters. One boy tried to push me up against a wall and tried to kiss me. I didn't let him, but that was that first time that had happened. And I had already been bullied a lot at this point, so I wasn't too surprised, but I was like, why would she be doing this after telling me that she loved me? Right. It also didn't help that the principal made it a point to come to my class and interrogate everyone about the locker situation. No one spoke, but it made me even more of a target. I was already so bullied at this point. I was dying. And I never really saw her after that. Her parents flew her back to Pennsylvania because this all happened in Nicaragua. All I know is that she's a stripper now and she still tries to contact me on Instagram, and my brother's on social media. They don't pay attention to her, and I know that she's had trouble with celebrities I've met when I worked in New York this time. First, we've got Justin Timberlake. He was nice.
He came to the restaurant that I was working. I was cocktailing, and he got a drink and he was waiting for someone else to come in. He was there for like a total of 5 minutes, but he was so nice and he kept staring at my eyes. So I was like, oh my God. Next is Bella Hadid. She was really nice. She actually complimented the earrings that I was wearing, which I thought was really kind of her. And she had manners. She was very polite. So I definitely appreciated that. And Hank Azaria, he was so nice. He does the voice of Bart and was in the Birdcage. He was so incredibly polite. He came into the vegan restaurant that I was working at and he was so impressed by my smoothie making skills. His kids were super polite. He was super polite. He ordered so much food off the menu and gave me a really, really nice tip. And best of all, he gave me some really good acting advice. So I will always love him.
Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? When I was going through puberty, my mom started comparing my body to hers. She would say things like, you know what, it's okay that you're not developing as quickly as I did, or that her boobs were already much bigger than mine were when I was 14. Here's a little backstory on my family. My mom has always been extremely dramatic and I think toxic. I feel bad calling her toxic. On the other hand, I have a great relationship with my dad. And my 2 siblings are both guys, so they don't have the same experience I did with my mom. My dad always acted as a buffer between me and my mom, even though my mom was the one that was starting all the fights. When I got into high school, I realized how attractive I was. Honestly, I had no clue that I was even a pretty girl. Looking back now, I realized that my mom really did make me feel like I was less than. When I started getting attention from boys in high school, I was really happy. I finally felt like I was seen. And because my mom wasn't there, I was able to thrive. Whereas in my house, I would even dress down in front of my mom just so that she wouldn't get jealous of me. The first time I brought a boy over to our house, my mom totally flipped out. She said that I was acting like an SLUT, but really, this boy was only a friend. My dad, thank God, told her that she needed to relax and that I was allowed to have friends. Eventually, I started dating a boy behind my mom's back. I did tell my dad, though. My dad was actually happy for me. This boyfriend was like my best friend. I could tell him everything, and he always responded really positively and gave me really good advice about my mom. But one day, one of my brothers let it slip that I had a boyfriend. My mom punished me for an entire month. My dad tried to intervene, but my mom went crazy. Here's the thing. She made me break up with him, and then I caught her flirting with him. Part 2 is up. Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? When I caught her flirting with my now ex, who she made me break up with, I pretended like I didn't hear her. But she was flirting with him. She told him that he had really good muscles and that he looked a lot older than he was. Thank God, my ex didn't respond and went home. Afterwards, I confronted my mom and told her that I overheard the conversation. She told me that I was being a snob. I didn't talk to her for about 3 days. On the 3rd day, she came crying to my room. She wanted us to make up. So she decided to take me shopping at the mall. And being the toxic person that she is, she managed to make everything about her. Tried on a bunch of clothes, which actually did look really good on her. Oh, by the way, my mom was a model back in the 90s, so she's kind of stuck in that mindset. She thinks she's the most beautiful person. She thinks she's the best. Anyway, when it was my turn to try on some clothes, she said that I looked a little too tubby, that I should maybe lose a few pounds. I told her that she hurt my feelings and she instantly apologized. Our relationship kept going like this up until I was 18. When I finally moved away for college, I was the happiest I'd ever been. Being away from my mom was like a breath of fresh air. But of course, it never stopped. My mom decided to come visit me to college and I knew that I needed to be prepared for that. When she came over to my dorm, I made sure it was super clean. Also, my grades were super good and I basically had a few friends but no boyfriend. When she came over to my apartment, she was like, oh, it's so simple. I was like, what do you mean? She said that I needed to decorate and show my personality more. She stayed with me for a total of 3 days, and the whole time I was grinding my teeth. When she finally left, I was happy again. Then my dad came to visit. Hanging out with my dad was the best. Took me shopping for my apartment and made me feel so at home. My mom got jealous. Part 3 is... Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? Disclaimers are not my story time, it's on Instagram. Then she somehow managed to get jealous that my dad and I were getting along super well. She called my dad while my dad was visiting me and threw a tantrum about how she needed him to go home. So my dad cut his trip short just to go be with my insecure mother. After that, I really didn't speak to my mom for about 2 months. I couldn't believe that she always managed to make me feel less than. And somehow she always made everything about her. I reached out to my brothers and asked them if they ever felt the same about my mom, and they said no. My mom was totally different with them. She took care of them and doted on them. Probably because they're boys and not me, because I'm a girl. One day I decided to call my grandmother and I told her everything. That's when my grandma told me that my mom has always been that way and that I just shouldn't take it personally. Apparently when my mom was growing up, she did not have any girlfriends. She always liked staying away from other women to not have any competition. But I told my grandma that she's my mom and that she shouldn't see me as competition. Grandma suspects that something is wrong with my mom, so, I don't know if she's bipolar or something, but obviously I can't diagnose her. Thankfully, I have other women in my life, my grandma and 2 of my aunts. They act fact, like my mom's more than my own mother. When I graduated college, I was actually engaged. My fiance and I bought a house and we started planning our wedding. And of course, my mom wanted to help me plan it. I really didn't want this, but I decided to give her a chance. But once again, she managed to make everything about her. The entire time, she criticized my choices, even my wedding dress, which I absolutely loved, and it really did look good on me. She told me I needed to wear something more flattering. And then she ended up wearing my wedding dress in a different color. After the wedding, I decided to tell my dad and my brothers that I was going to cut my mom off. My dad begged me not to, but I still went ahead and did it. I called my mom and told her that I needed some time apart from her and that I did not want her calling me. Of course, she pretended like she had never done anything wrong in my life and that she's only been the perfect dedicated mother that she wishes she could be. Instead of arguing with her, I told her to just give me some space. She agreed to it and I haven't spoken to her in about 3 months. My dad and grandma keep begging me to talk to her. I don't think my mom is sad at all. She's always posting to her Instagram. She goes to Pilates, brunch with her friends, and travels with my dad. I think she's probably fine, but what should I do? Story time about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. My husband and I had been married for 7 years. 3 years into the marriage, he started sleeping on the couch. We would constantly fight back then because of several things. Number 1, I knew he was cheating on me, but he would never admit to it. Number 2, I wanted to have children, but he didn't want to at the time. Number 3, he never wanted to spend time with me and always prioritized his friends. And this was around the time that he started getting physically violent. Because we'd already been married for a few years at that point, I never saw him as a violent person. It all started by him shoving me one time during an argument. But he shoved me so hard I fell to the ground and ended up bruising my chin. And even though this was a big problem between me and him, it became an even bigger problem between me and my family. As soon as my parents saw the bruise, they started accusing him of beating me. And of course, my first instinct was to defend my husband. My parents begged me to stay with them and I didn't. I went back to my husband and demanded an apology, but he wouldn't even look me in the face. He told me he basically did not care. Once he started sleeping on the couch, it was just like we were roommates. We stayed like this for years. Anytime we got into an argument, he would just look for something to throw at me. One day he threw a jewelry box at me and I ended up in the ER. And of course, the hospital thought it was my husband. So I lied and said that I tripped. And unfortunately, I went straight back to my husband. Part 2 is story time about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. After years of him pushing me, shoving me, throwing things at me, and even slapping me, I became so numb to it. It would get me really angry and upset at the moment, but as soon as he would apologize, we would just go back to normal. But even our normal wasn't normal. We didn't sleep in the same bed. He was never really home, and when he was always playing video games. This was also around the time that he lost his job. So for 5 years, I was basically the breadwinner. He told me he didn't want to get a job and he wanted to play video games. I didn't tell him anything because I didn't want it to turn into a fight. But I was angry at the thought that I had to now support him. But like I said, my parents did not like him at all. They knew something was up because I always had some sort of bruise. My parents made it a habit of showing up unannounced to our house. I was actually really grateful to my parents. This didn't upset me at all. But my husband, on the other hand, hated my parents. One day he asked me, why do they even care about you so much? You're not that important. Around a year ago, I started feeling really sick all the time. At the time, I didn't know why. One day, I walk into the kitchen and see my husband holding eye drops in his hand, but he quickly put it away. I asked him why he was holding that, and he said nothing, mind your own business. So I did. A few months later, I'm having a conversation with a coworker, and he told me a story about somebody using eye drops on someone else to make them sick. This is when it all clicked. I had all these weird stomach issues. And I never realized that it was him putting eye drops in my coffee. This is when I decided to file for divorce. Instead of filing for divorce and leaving him, I went home and told him that I was going to get a divorce. He grabbed a hammer and started chasing me. I locked myself in the bathroom. Part 3 is up. Story time about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. When I saw him grab the hammer, I started instantly running. I ran straight to the bathroom and locked myself. The good thing is that he would never damage this house because he does love it, so he didn't swing at the door. I stayed in the bathroom for an hour explaining to him why I wanted to get a divorce. After the 2 hours, I thought he had calmed down. He basically told me that he would give me the divorce with no problem. But let me remind you, I was the breadwinner and he had no job. He was completely dependent on me. But as soon as I opened the door, he pushed in and started hitting me. Unfortunately, I didn't tell anyone in my family what my plan was. Suddenly, I wake up and I realize I'm on the ground. 4 hours had passed. I get up and look at myself in the mirror and my face was completely swollen. I walk into the living room and my husband was there playing video games, just like he did every day all day. As soon as he sees me, he says, "You better go wash your face." Instead, I grabbed my things and ran out. He didn't even bother chasing me. I called my parents on the way to the hospital and they met me there. Luckily, there was no major damage. My parents helped me file a police report. And when the police showed up to see my husband, he had cleaned the bathroom. Guess what he told them? That he was the one that wanted to divorce me because I was crazy. And that I had made up the whole attack. He says that I must have hit myself in the face. That's when the cops asked him, "How do you know that she was hit in the face?" Gotcha. He said he had assumed that I was being hit in the face. My brothers and parents went over and kicked him out. I sold the place and bought a house down the street from my parents. I am now so much happier. Feel like I'm aging backwards from not being around him. The constant feel and nervousness I felt around him took a toll on me, and I just hadn't realized it. To this day, he says he did nothing, and the cops have done nothing against him. I need proof, so what should I do? Story time about how my boyfriend shames me for having cellulite. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. I'm 24 years old and my boyfriend is 21. According to him, he has never been with any girl who's had cellulite before, or even an ounce of body fat. Yes, I know what you're thinking, he's a total asshole, which in that sense, he is. But the rest of the time, he's completely fine and actually sweet. We met last year at a friend's party. At the party, I instantly fell in love with him. I thought he was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it was reciprocated. I saw him from across the room and he made eye contact. A few minutes later, he walked over to me and just struck up a conversation. I know that people present themselves the way they want to be seen, especially when they're trying to impress someone they're attracted to. He started telling me about how he's studying to be a doctor, how he volunteers at animal shelters, and that every single weekend he also volunteers at the soup kitchen. Everything he said was absolutely perfect. By the end of the night, he had asked me out on a date and I said yes. I did explain to him that I didn't want anything serious and he said that was totally fine. I was trying to focus on my studies, so having a boyfriend was not in my plans. But after we went on 7 dates, he asked me to be his girlfriend. He wouldn't take no for an answer. After about a month, I finally said yes. Mind you, at this point, he hadn't seen me naked, not even in a bathing suit. The very night that I said yes to being his girlfriend, he asked me to come over to his place. He made a whole gourmet dinner, even bought super expensive wine. So we ended up doing it for the first time that night. The next morning when I woke up, the first thing he said to me was, "Do you ever exercise?" I was shocked. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend shames me for having cellulite. Disclaimers are not my story time, I sent me on Instagram. That's when he said point blank, super serious, "Do you ever exercise?" I just stared at him. I had literally just woken up in his bed after the first time we ever did it. Then I thought he must be joking. So I started to laugh a little, and then he says, "No, seriously, do you ever exercise?" I said, "Sometimes." Then he told me, "You should really try to work out at least 5 times a week." I went home and finally texted him saying that I wasn't comfortable with the way he spoke to me. That's when he said that what he said to me was completely normal, and that I shouldn't be offended. This was all in text, by the way. That's when he sends me another text message saying, "You wouldn't have as much cellulite as you do if you didn't eat so much fast food. And if you exercise 5 times a week like I told you." I didn't reply to him for the rest of the day. Later that day, he shows up to my apartment and says, "I should feel comfortable enough to tell you what I think about you." He somehow ended up making me feel bad and I ended up apologizing. Obviously, after that, I became really self-conscious about my cellulite and my entire body. So anytime we were together, I would always stay under the covers. By the way, my boyfriend doesn't have a great body. He's super soft and pudgy. Last week, he told me that he had abs though. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend shames me for having cellulite. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. One day he pulls up his shirt and says, "Look, I have abs." Which, no, he doesn't. He's super soft and has a thick layer of fat on it. I smirked and he said, "What?" And I said, "You don't have abs." Then he says, "Yes, I do. I'm in better shape than you." By the way, he said this in front of his friends, so I was super embarrassed and stayed quiet the entire day. He finally went to drop me off and I was so happy to be home. But he decided to come upstairs with me. Got straight into my PJs. And when I came out of my bedroom, he says, "Wow, your cellulite's getting worse by the day." That's when I finally broke. I turned around and started yelling at him. I told him he had no right to talk about my body the way that he did, and that all he does is objectify me. He started laughing and said, "Wow, those are big words." And that when we met, he thought that I was in better shape. My clothes obviously tricked him. I'm 5'4" and I weigh 130 pounds. I am by no means fat, but the way that he was bullying me was making me think that I was. That's when I told him that he was the fat one, and that he had a big, huge beer belly. I also told him that his face was super round, but that didn't bother me. Oh yeah, and that his hairy back was gross. Then he said, "Wow, I can't believe you're attacking my physical appearance." Then he stormed out of my apartment, and as soon as he left, I felt happy. We haven't spoken in 4 days. I'm afraid that if he asks me to get back with him, I will. But I should just break up with him, right? What should I do?
Rating celebrities I've met while working in Los Angeles and New York. Part 1. I'll start with the juiciest one, JC Chazé. He came into the Mexican restaurant I was working in on Sunset Boulevard, and he was begging me to go home with him for a party he was having. He was like, "Oh, I have so many people coming over, just come over." And I kept saying no, and then I basically had to get someone else to go serve him because he was really drunk. Now for the rudest celeb I've ever met, Rick Ross. He came with his posse of almost 10 guys, including himself. They sat outside. They didn't want anyone else to be sat outside. We didn't see anyone else. They demanded only I go to their table, and when I did go to their table, his posse then informed me that Rick Ross would not be speaking to me and that I should direct all my questions to them. And he never looked me in the face, never said hello, not one thing. None of them said hello. It was not like that. And then they didn't tip me on a $600 bill. They had a bunch of quesadillas and margaritas. What it's like to be an actress in LA part 2. This is a disturbing one, so please hold on. It is 2016. I had made quite a bit of money that year. I booked a Google commercial, Wells Fargo, Best Buy commercial. I was making money. I decided to go to Urban Outfitters, try on some dresses, treat myself. And I noticed this guy keeps staring at me as I'm shopping. And when a guy stares at you when you're shopping, you know that's not cool. My God, just chill, bro. I stare at him back. Whatever, I continue to shop. I exit with my little Urban Outfitters bag, and he begins to shout at me. He basically followed me out and he's just shouting. He's like, hey, are you an actress? And then I look at him and I'm like, yeah, everyone in LA is an actor. And he's like, okay, I want to take pictures of you. I'm a photographer. I'm also a showrunner. A showrunner is basically someone who decides which TV shows are going to be in the network season, which is a pretty good job. And I say, okay, what's your name? So I take out my phone, I Google his name, and it is the person he's claiming to be. Come back for part 2. I pulled out my phone, I Googled him. He was who he said he was. He showed me his website where he had all these shots of his models. All of them were signed to big agencies. And of course, I didn't tell my manager anything. I just gave him my email address. I was like, okay, email me and then we can set up a time. I asked him, do you pay? He's like, no, I don't pay. And I was like, okay, fine. I guess it'll just be for trade. And he begins to email me every single week asking me when we can shoot. I begin to say, I can't. I just had a really bad feeling. If you beg, if you're a photographer and you're begging a model to shoot for free, it just comes off good. Don't trust people that are like that. I had a feeling and I just should have trusted myself. I guess there's gonna have to be a part 3 because this is a longer story. So, do you think I went by myself? Duh, I did not go by myself. I took my best friend with me, thank heavens, and we proceed to go to his house, which is in Los Feliz. Beautiful house. This guy's a showrunner. He's a millionaire. He's got an amazing house, beautiful Tesla, 2 Teslas. I guess come back for part 3. So we begin to shoot outside by his pool. My best friend is inside working on her laptop, and he begins to compliment my facial features. My facial features, nothing terrible. And then he begins to ask me what I do outside for fun, like other than work. And then I said, I like to cook. I like to walk, you know, just random stuff. I didn't want to really chat with this guy. I just wanted to take pictures and get out. And then hopefully, you know, he would remember me for the future for a TV show or for another paying photo shoot. So then he begins to ask me if I'm in a relationship. I wasn't at the time, but I said yes. And then he begins to ask me other things like, do I masturbate and do I want to fuck outside of the relationship? As soon as he asked me that third question, I got up. I said, you're making me extremely uncomfortable. You know that you're doing that. I want that SD card, and my friend and I are leaving right now. I walk inside to his house and he begins to say, what are you talking about? I didn't say anything. In front of my best friend, like if he hadn't said what he just said. I asked him for the SD card. He said, no, I'm not giving it to you. You guys are gonna have to come back for part 4, sorry. So he refuses to give us the SD card. I assess the situation. My friend is shouting at him to give us the SD card. He's not budging. Okay, I say, let's go. He could call the police. He could accuse us of doing something when he's the one who's sexually harassing me. Let's just go. We leave. I call my agent on the phone on the way back to my apartment. At this point, I am hysterical. I am crying. I feel like I've been abused. It was an awful experience. He did say other things that I just don't want to say on here that were much more perverted than what I said. My manager, who was a male, obviously I'm not with him anymore, and he's like, oh, this is that showrunner? And I was like, yeah, that showrunner. I want to call SAG-AFTRA. I want to call the police. I want to file a report at the very least. And my manager proceeds to tell me, Esther, like, we can't do anything against him. This guy is too powerful. He's well known in the industry. We can't do anything and we shouldn't. He basically told me to shut up. Okay? This was right before Me Too started. What did I do? I shut up.